The night Daniel Carter saw his ex-wife carrying a tray of pastries through the Grand Meridian Ballroom, he smiled like a man watching life prove him right. To him, Emily Carter had finally landed exactly where she belonged, on the quiet edge of other people's success, dressed in a plain black apron, her blonde hair pinned back too quickly, her hands moving carefully over silver platters while men in tailored suits talked about money in voices soft enough to sound important. The room glittered around her with crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, white roses in tall glass vases, and the warm, expensive hum of people who believed comfort was proof of character. Daniel stood near the bar with Vanessa Blake on his arm, a woman who wore confidence the way some people wore perfume, noticeable before she even spoke. He had not expected to see Emily there. Not after the divorce. Not after the house, the joint accounts, the car, the friends, and nearly every piece of the life they had built had somehow ended up on his side of the paper. 9 months ago, he had left her with a storage unit, a few boxes, and a settlement small enough to be called generous only by lawyers who billed by the hour. He remembered her sitting across from him in that conference room, pale but silent, her wedding ring already removed, her fingers folded so tightly together that her knuckles had turned white. He had mistaken that silence for weakness. Humans do that often enough to make history embarrassing. Now, watching her adjust a row of lemon tarts beneath the ballroom lights, he felt the old satisfaction rise in him again, smooth and poisonous. Vanessa followed his gaze and lifted one perfect eyebrow. "Isn't that your ex-wife?" she asked, keeping her voice low but not low enough. "I thought she got something in the divorce." Daniel took a slow sip of bourbon, his eyes still on Emily. "She did," he said. "A lesson." The words floated across the space between them like a match tossed onto dry paper. Emily heard them. Daniel saw the tiny pause in her hand as she placed the last pastry on the tray. For 1 second, only one, her face changed. Not enough for the room to notice. Not enough for Vanessa to enjoy. But Daniel knew her expressions the way a man knows a house he once owned and then abandoned. He saw the flicker of hurt, the memory of every time he had told her she was too soft, too sheltered, too dependent, too ordinary for the real world. Then the flicker vanished. Emily straightened the edge of the linen tablecloth, lifted her chin, and continued working as if Daniel's voice had been nothing more than background noise, like the clink of glasses or the distant laughter of people pretending to listen. What Daniel did not see was the small gold logo stamped on every pastry box behind her. What he did not notice was the event planner checking Emily's name on a clipboard with visible relief. What he could not imagine, not even with all his expensive education and polished arrogance, was that the entire dessert table everyone had been praising for the past hour had not been delivered by some faceless catering company. It had been created by Emily Carter in a rented commercial kitchen 12 miles away, after months of sleepless nights, burned fingertips, grocery receipts, failed batches, and prayers whispered over rising dough at 2 in the morning. Daniel thought she was serving the room. He had no idea the room had been eating from her hands all night. Emily did not look at Daniel after that. She had learned, painfully and late, that some men mistook eye contact for invitation and silence for surrender. Instead, she focused on the tray in front of her, on the neat rows of mini pecan tartlets, raspberry cream puffs, and vanilla bean cupcakes dusted with powdered sugar so fine it looked like winter had settled on them. Her hands were steady now, steadier than they had been 9 months ago, when she had signed her name at the bottom of the divorce agreement, while Daniel's attorney slid page after page across the conference table as if he were dealing cards in a game she had already lost. The ballroom smelled of champagne, expensive cologne, fresh roses, and warm sugar, a strange mixture of wealth and memory that made the air feel heavier than it should have. She could hear Vanessa laughing softly behind her, could feel Daniel's attention, resting on her back like a cold hand, but Emily kept moving. One silver tongue, one pastry liner, one clean napkin folded into a triangle. Small tasks had saved her before. They were saving her now. Across the room, the event planner, Marjorie Ellis, lifted 2 fingers in a small signal, and Emily nodded. The dessert table needed another tray of blackberry lemon bars near the center arrangement before the awards portion began. Emily turned toward the service corridor, passing beneath a wall of framed city photographs and gold sconces that threw warm light across the marble. Only when the ballroom doors swung shut behind her did she allow herself to breathe. The corridor was quieter, lined with rolling carts, stacked linen bins, and stainless steel coffee urns waiting to be filled. Her assistant for the night, a college student named Nora who had answered Emily's online listing 3 days earlier, looked up from a clipboard. "Are you okay?" Nora asked. Emily gave her the kind of smile women learn to use when honesty would take too long. "I am fine." It was not entirely a lie. She was not broken. That counted. Nora glanced toward the ballroom doors. "That man was staring at you like he knew you." Emily lifted the tray of lemon bars from the cooling rack. "He used to." She said it gently, but the words landed with the weight of an old door closing. Nora, wisely, did not ask more. People imagine that betrayal arrives as one dramatic moment, one discovery, one slammed door, one cruel sentence delivered under perfect lighting. Emily knew better. Betrayal was usually administrative. It came in passwords changed without warning, bank statements she could no longer access, dinner invitations that stopped arriving, friends who took 3 days to answer a text, and a husband who suddenly spoke to her in the polished tone of a man preparing for court. Daniel had not simply left her. He had organized her disappearance. By the time he told her the marriage was over, his new apartment was already furnished, his accounts were already separated, and his story was already circulating among their friends. Emily was emotional. Emily was difficult. Emily had never understood money. Emily, poor fragile Emily, needed to learn how the real world worked. The cruelest part was not that people believed him. The cruelest part was that, for a while, she believed him too. She remembered standing in the kitchen of the house they had once chosen together, staring at the pale gray cabinets, the farmhouse sink, the breakfast nook where she had planned birthday mornings for children they never had, while Daniel leaned against the island in his charcoal suit and said, almost kindly, "Be realistic, Emily. You were never built for the real world." At the time, the sentence had gone through her cleanly, leaving no visible wound. Now, in the service corridor of the Grand Meridian, with a tray of lemon bars in her hands and a paid invoice in her bag, she almost wanted to thank him for saying it. Not because it was true, because it had become the wall she pushed against every single morning. She checked the edge of the tray, adjusted one corner of parchment paper, and looked down at the small gold sticker on the side of each box. Carter and Rose. The name still made her chest tighten. Carter was the name Daniel thought he had ruined. Rose was her mother's middle name, written in fading blue ink across the first page of the recipe notebook Emily had found in a cardboard box on the worst night of her life. She had not meant to build anything from it. At first, she had only needed something warm in her hands that did not belong to Daniel. Something that smelled like home before marriage had taught her how expensive loneliness could be. The first batch had burned around the edges. The second had collapsed in the middle. The third had been good enough for Rachel Moore to close her eyes after one bite and say, "Emily, this is not grief. This is inventory." Emily had laughed then, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. It had sounded strange in her empty apartment, but not unwelcome. Now, as she pushed back through the ballroom doors carrying the next tray, she saw Daniel still near the bar, still watching, still certain he understood the scene in front of him. Poor man. He had always been most confident when he was most wrong. Daniel did not follow Emily into the service corridor the first time, but his eyes did. She felt them even after the ballroom doors closed behind her, that old invisible pressure of being measured, reduced, and quietly corrected by a man who had once made criticism sound like concern. She placed the empty tray on a stainless steel cart and stood still for a moment, letting the cooler air of the back hallway settle against her face. The Grand Meridian kept its public rooms warm and golden, all chandeliers and polished glass, but behind the doors the world was practical. Gray tile, fluorescent lights, metal shelves, white cardboard boxes stacked 6 feet high, a mop bucket near the wall, the honest architecture of labor. Emily had come to prefer this side of beautiful places. In the ballroom, people performed importance. Back here, things either worked or they did not. Nora was counting the remaining dessert cups with the concentration of someone afraid of disappointing a woman she barely knew. "We have 32 chocolate mousse cups left, 48 lemon bars, and maybe 2 dozen pecan tartlets," she said. Emily checked the time on her phone. 8:43. The awards program would begin in 17 minutes. Move the mousse cups to the front left table after the first speech, Emily said. People reach for chocolate when they are bored. Nora laughed, relieved, and Emily almost smiled. It still surprised her, the strange authority in her own voice. 9 months earlier, she had apologized to a grocery store cashier because her debit card had declined on a $46 purchase of flour, butter, eggs, and milk. She had stood there under the bright lights of Henderson Market, with a line forming behind her and her face burning, while the cashier politely asked whether she had another card. She had wanted the floor to open beneath her, not dramatically, just practically, like an elevator to anywhere else. That night, she had gone home to her rented one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a brick building near the highway, where the heat clicked loudly in the walls and the bedroom window never sealed quite right. She had unpacked the last of her boxes because leaving them stacked in the corner had started to feel like admitting she was temporary in her own life. At the bottom of a box labeled kitchen, beneath a chipped mixing bowl and 2 faded dish towels, she found her mother's old recipe notebook. Rose Whitaker had written everything by hand, in blue ink that had softened with age. Pound cake, peach cobbler, lemon bars for church basement luncheons, cinnamon rolls for snow days. There were stains on the pages, small brown fingerprints of vanilla and butter and thyme. Emily had sat on the floor with the notebook open in her lap and cried so quietly that even she seemed embarrassed by it. Not because of Daniel. Not exactly. She cried because somewhere between being his wife and being his failure, she had forgotten she had once belonged to people who loved her before she was useful. The first thing she baked was not pretty. The lemon bars came out uneven, the crust too thick in one corner, the filling soft in the middle. She ate one standing at the counter in her pajamas at 1:15 in the morning and tasted, beneath the sugar and lemon, something almost unbearable. Memory. The next day, Rachel Moore stopped by with groceries Emily had not asked for and dignity Emily tried not to need. Rachel took one bite, looked at the pan, then looked at Emily with the sharp, practical tenderness that had gotten them both through college finals and bad first apartments. "You could sell these," Rachel said. Emily had laughed because the idea was ridiculous. She had no business plan, no savings worth naming, no commercial kitchen, no website, no courage that lasted more than 15 minutes at a time. Rachel shrugged and took another bite. Then start with 15 minutes. That was how it began, not with a dream board or a grand reinvention, because life is rarely that considerate. It began with a handwritten post in a neighborhood group, 6 orders from women who remembered Rose's baking, and Emily writing costs in the margin of an old notebook like she was decoding survival itself. Flour, $3.89. Butter, $5.49. Eggs, $4.29. Packaging, $12. Profit, $17 after delivery gas. She circled that number 3 times. $17 would not change a life, but it had changed the direction of hers. Now, in the service corridor, surrounded by boxes stamped with Carter and Rose in gold foil she had paid extra for even when Rachel said it was unnecessary, Emily touched the edge of one label with her thumb. Through the ballroom doors, applause rose and faded. Daniel was out there, still believing he had come to witness her downfall. Emily lifted the next tray, squared her shoulders, and walked back toward the noise. The applause in the ballroom had a different texture when Emily returned, thicker now, rolling over the tables as the first award recipient walked toward the stage. She moved along the side wall with the tray balanced against her palm, careful not to disturb the guests who had turned their chairs toward the podium. In another life, she would have been seated beside Daniel at a table near the front, smiling at people whose names she had practiced in the car, laughing at jokes she did not find funny, wearing shoes that cost more than her weekly grocery budget now, and somehow hurt twice as much. Daniel had loved rooms like this because rooms like this loved men who spoke in numbers. Quarterly growth, market share, acquisition strategy, expansion plans. He could make an ordinary sentence sound like a future, and for years Emily had believed the future was something he would build while she kept the lights warm behind him. She slipped the lemon bars onto the center table and adjusted the small card that read Meyer Lemon Shortbread, Carter, and Rose. A woman in a navy cocktail dress reached for one before Emily had even stepped away. "These are incredible," the woman whispered, as if complimenting dessert during a speech were a minor crime. "Did the hotel make them?" Emily smiled politely. "No, ma'am. A local bakery did." The woman turned the card toward herself and read the name. Carter and Rose. I need them for my daughter's bridal shower. She opened her clutch, took a business card, and tucked it beside the dessert label. Emily felt the tiny paper rectangle land like a quiet blessing. One card. One possible order. One more inch of ground beneath her feet. Across the room, Daniel watched the exchange with a faint crease between his eyebrows. He did not understand why guests kept speaking to Emily as if she mattered. That had always been his blind spot. He believed status came from position, from ownership papers, from who stood at the microphone and who waited near the wall. Emily had learned that value could move more quietly. It could arrive in a borrowed mixing bowl, in a 5-star review from a woman named Mrs. Patterson who ordered cinnamon rolls every Friday, in $23 of profit after a Saturday pickup, in an email subject line that read catering inquiry and made Emily sit down before she opened it. Daniel leaned close to Vanessa and said something Emily could not hear. Vanessa's eyes moved over Emily's apron, her simple black flats, the faint dusting of powdered sugar near her wrist. Then Vanessa smiled with the bright, careless cruelty of someone who had never had to calculate rent against groceries. When Emily passed their table on her way back to the service doors, Vanessa lifted her empty champagne flute slightly. "Excuse me," she said. "Could you bring another one?" The request was not rude enough to object to, which made it sharper. Daniel looked amused, waiting to see whether Emily would bristle, whether pride would betray her. For half a second, the room narrowed to that glass, that smile, that old familiar invitation to be humiliated in public. Emily could have corrected her. She could have said she was not hotel staff. She could have said the word founder and watched Vanessa's expression change. But the old recipe notebook had taught her patience in a way Daniel never had. Some things collapsed if pulled from the oven too early. So Emily took the flute without lowering her eyes. "Certainly," she said. Her voice was calm enough to surprise even herself. She carried the glass to a passing server, exchanged a quiet word, and returned to the dessert table before Vanessa could enjoy the moment properly. Daniel's smile faded by a fraction. That was the first crack. He had expected embarrassment. What he saw instead was control. Emily straightened the display one final time, then stepped back into the shadow beside a white column as Marjorie Ellis hurried toward her with a headset tucked behind one ear and relief written across her face. "Emily," Marjorie whispered, "the board chair just asked who made the desserts. They want to acknowledge you before the partnership announcement." Emily's hand tightened around the edge of the linen. The ballroom lights seemed to brighten all at once. Across the room, Daniel lifted his glass, still unaware that the evening had already begun turning against him, slowly, beautifully, like sugar becoming caramel. Marjorie's words landed so softly that, for a moment, Emily was certain she had misunderstood them. The board chair wanted to acknowledge her. Not the hotel, not a catering department, not some invisible kitchen where women like her were expected to work quietly and vanish before the applause began. Her, Emily Carter. The woman Daniel had once told could not manage a checking account without him. The woman who had cried over a declined debit card in Henderson Market. The woman who had spent 3 weeks comparing the cost of butter at 4 different grocery stores because 12 cents mattered when every dollar had a job. She looked past Marjorie toward the ballroom, where Daniel sat angled toward the stage with Vanessa beside him, his posture relaxed, his confidence untouched. He had no idea that while he had been making small jokes at her expense, a much larger sentence was being written around him. "Are you sure?" Emily whispered, "because some wounds make recognition feel suspicious." Marjorie gave her a brisk, kind look. "I am very sure. Half the room has asked about the desserts, and Mr. Harlan wants to announce the new vendor partnership tonight. I told him Carter and Rose is local, woman-owned, and available for corporate events. He loved that. Woman-owned." Emily felt the phrase move through her like warmth spreading from a match. There had been a time when ownership meant Daniel's name on the deed, Daniel's signature on the account, Daniel's voice answering questions meant for both of them. Now ownership meant a stack of invoices. In her folder, a rented kitchen paid by the hour, a sales tax account she had opened after watching 3 online tutorials, and a label printer that jammed whenever she was already late. It was not glamorous. It was hers. That made it more beautiful than anything Daniel had ever purchased. "I am not dressed for a stage," Emily said. glancing down at the apron tied at her waist and the faint flower mark near her sleeve. Marjorie smiled. Then do not go as decoration. Go as the person who did the work. There it was, simple enough to sound almost rude, which is how truth often arrives when humans finally stop wrapping it in tissue paper. Emily untied the apron slowly and folded it over her arm. Underneath, she wore a plain black dress she had bought on clearance for $39 and sensible flats with cushioned soles. No diamonds. No designer label. No armor except competence. She smoothed her hair, pressed her palms together once to stop the tremor, and thought of Rachel in her apartment kitchen, sitting at the tiny table with a calculator, a cup of coffee, and absolute refusal to let Emily underestimate herself. Rachel had been the one who taught her to price by more than ingredients. Your time counts, Rachel had said. Your skill counts. Your exhaustion is not a discount. Emily had resisted at first. Charging real money felt arrogant when she still washed mixing bowls in a sink that leaked under the cabinet. But the first time a customer paid full price without flinching, Emily understood something Daniel had spent years making her forget. Value did not become real only when someone powerful approved it. Sometimes value was already there, waiting for the owner to stop apologizing for it. The microphone crackled on stage, and the room settled into a polite hush. Charles Harlan, the board chair, adjusted his glasses and thanked the sponsors, the hotel staff, the donors, and the executives who had made the evening possible. Emily stood near the side of the stage, partly hidden by a white floral arrangement, her folded apron in one hand like evidence of where she had come from. Daniel looked bored now, swirling the ice in his glass while Vanessa checked her reflection in the dark screen of her phone. Then Charles smiled toward the dessert table. Before we move to our partnership announcement, I want to recognize a new local business that has impressed nearly every guest in this room tonight. Emily's heartbeat climbed into her throat. Daniel's hand stilled around his glass. The desserts this evening were created by Carter and Rose, founded by Emily Carter. For half a second, the room was silent. Then applause began, first scattered, then full and warm. Emily stepped into the light. Across the ballroom, Daniel's face changed as if someone had quietly removed the floor beneath his certainty. Emily did not remember walking to the stage so much as arriving there, as if the applause had carried her across the marble floor before her fear could catch up. The lights were warmer at the front of the room, bright enough to soften the edges of the audience and turn every champagne flute into a small flame. She stood beside Charles Harlan with her folded apron still in one hand, suddenly aware of everything ordinary about herself. The clearance dress, the comfortable flats, the tiny burn mark near her thumb from a tray she had pulled too quickly from the oven 2 nights earlier. For years, Daniel had trained her to believe ordinary was the same as unimpressive. Yet the room was clapping for the work of those same ordinary hands. Charles turned toward her with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to microphones. Emily Carter started Carter and Rose less than a year ago, he said. And tonight her company reminded us what local talent can bring to a room like this. A polite laugh moved through the ballroom when he added, judging by the empty dessert plates, I would say the market research is already complete. Emily smiled because it was expected, but the sound she heard most clearly was not the applause. It was the sudden absence of Daniel's voice in her head. No correction, no dismissal, no smooth, patient explanation of why she was overreaching. Just silence, wide and clean. Across the room, Daniel sat motionless, his glass untouched, his face arranged in the careful neutrality of a man trying to do math after. The numbers have betrayed him. Vanessa looked from Emily to the dessert table, then down at the business card beside her plate as if it had personally embarrassed her. Emily saw the exact moment Vanessa realized she had asked the founder for a drink. The knowledge did not make Emily cruel. It made her calm. That was better. Cruelty had always belonged to people like Daniel, people who needed someone smaller beside them so they could feel tall. Calm belonged to people who had survived being made small and discovered they were still there. Charles handed her the microphone. The old Emily would have refused it. She would have waved both hands, blushed, stepped backward, and let someone else explain her own accomplishment because taking up space had once felt impolite. But a woman does not build a business one batch at a time by remaining afraid of her own name. Emily accepted the microphone. It felt heavier than it looked. Thank you, she said, and her voice, though quiet, carried clearly through the room. Carter and Rose began in a very small kitchen with one borrowed mixer, one family recipe notebook, and one friend who believed I could charge more than an apology. Gentle laughter followed, warm and real. Rachel would have loved that line. Emily continued, her eyes moving over the room, but not stopping on Daniel. I used to think starting over meant proving something to the people who doubted me. I do not think that anymore. Starting over is quieter than that. Sometimes it is paying attention to what you can still do when the life you planned is gone. Sometimes it is 6 cupcakes in a cardboard box. Sometimes it is $17 of profit and enough courage to try again the next morning. The room had gone still now, the kind of stillness that meant people were not merely listening, but recognizing something they had no intention of admitting aloud. Emily lowered the microphone slightly, then looked toward the dessert table, where the gold Carter and Rose labels shone beneath the chandeliers. My mother, Rose, used to say that good food does not fix everything, but it can remind people they are worth caring for. That is what I want this business to do. Charles began clapping first. Others followed. This time, the applause felt different. Less polite, more personal. Emily handed back the microphone, and when she finally allowed herself to glance toward Daniel, she found him staring at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not pity, not superiority, recognition. And perhaps that was why he looked so unsettled. For the first time in years, Daniel Carter was seeing Emily clearly, and the woman in front of him was not the one he had left behind. Emily stepped down from the stage into a room that no longer felt arranged against her. The applause faded, conversations resumed, and the ballroom returned to its polished rhythm. But something invisible had shifted. People who had looked through her 30 minutes earlier now looked at her directly. A woman from a nonprofit board asked whether Carter and Rose could handle a fundraiser for 200 guests. A hotel manager wanted her card. One of the younger executives told her the pecan tartlets tasted like something his grandmother used to make in Tennessee, and for reasons Emily could not explain, that compliment nearly undid her more than the applause had. Praise for success was easy to doubt. Praise for care went somewhere deeper. She had just tucked 3 business cards into the inside pocket of her folder when Daniel appeared beside the white column near the dessert table. He had waited until Vanessa was speaking to someone else, which was typical. Daniel preferred difficult conversations without witnesses unless the witnesses benefited him. His expression had settled into something polished and cautious, the same expression he had worn in the lawyer's office when pretending fairness was merely paperwork. Emily, he said. Her name sounded different in his mouth now, less like possession, more like uncertainty. She turned toward him with the calm, professional smile she had used all evening. Daniel. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, guests laughed softly, forks touched porcelain, and the string quartet near the far wall eased into a familiar standard. It was almost funny, Emily thought, how the world refused to. Pause for private history. Daniel glanced at the dessert labels, then at the folded apron over her arm. I did not realize this was yours. There were a dozen answers she could have given him. You never realized much about me. You were busy taking inventory of what you could use. You thought anything I made was small because I made it quietly. But old pain, when fully ripened, sometimes turns into restraint. Emily simply said, I know. The 2 words landed cleanly. Daniel looked away first. That, too, was new. You have done well, he said, and there it was, the compliment shaped like a tax form, careful and late and strangely underfunded. Emily remembered how desperately she had once wanted him to say something like that. She had imagined it during the first weeks after the divorce, while eating toast for dinner because groceries had to last until Friday, while falling asleep with her phone under her pillow in case he texted, while wondering whether the version of her he described to everyone else had replaced the real one entirely. She had wanted him to see her. Then she had survived long enough to stop needing it. Thank you, she said. Daniel shifted his weight. I mean it. I did not know you had this in you. That sentence would have broken her once. Tonight, it only clarified things. Emily looked at him, really looked at him, at the expensive suit, the tired eyes, the careful haircut, the confidence that now seemed less like strength and more like furniture arranged to hide cracks in the wall. That is because you never looked for it, she said. Her voice was not sharp. It was worse for him than sharp. It was factual. Daniel's mouth tightened, and for one brief second, the old impatience flashed across his face, the irritation of a man discovering that the world had continued editing itself without his permission. Before he could answer, Vanessa appeared beside him, her smile fixed too tightly. "Daniel, Charles wants to introduce us to the regional director," she said, then looked at Emily. "Congratulations on the desserts." The words were polite enough to pass inspection and cold enough to leave frost. Emily inclined her head. "Thank you. I hope you enjoyed them." Vanessa glanced at the table, where her plate held only crumbs. Evidence, Emily had learned, was often deliciously inconvenient. Daniel looked as if he wanted to say more, but the room was pulling him back into its current. For years, Emily had been the one pulled along behind him, smiling when required, shrinking when convenient, smoothing the edges of his ambition so no one cut themselves on it. Now he was the one caught between appearances and discomfort. It was not revenge exactly. Revenge sounded too loud, too eager, too dependent on his suffering. This was quieter. This was balance finding its way home in sensible shoes. Marjorie waved from near the stage, holding a cream folder against her chest, and Emily knew from the urgency in her eyes that the vendor partnership was not merely a compliment. It was paperwork, real paperwork, paid paperwork, the kind that could cover rent, equipment, ingredients, and maybe, if she was careful, the commercial mixer she had bookmarked online and visited like a tourist staring through the window of a life she wanted. Emily turned away from Daniel without asking permission from his silence. As she crossed the ballroom toward Marjorie, she felt the folded apron over her arm, the business cards in her pocket, and the small burn near her thumb. Proof of labor, proof of survival, proof that she had not been rescued from the ruins. She had learned to build with them. Marjorie met Emily halfway across the ballroom, with the cream folder pressed so tightly to her chest that the corner had begun to bend. "I am sorry to throw this at you in the middle of the evening," she said, though her eyes were bright with the kind of professional excitement people try to hide because joy makes them look less efficient. "But Charles wants to move quickly. We have 6 corporate breakfasts, 3 donor receptions, and the spring leadership retreat coming up over the next 4 months. He asked whether Carter and Rose could become our preferred dessert vendor for all of them." Emily heard the words, but they seemed to arrive from the far end of a long hallway. 6 breakfasts, 3 receptions, a leadership retreat. Her mind, trained by necessity now, began doing arithmetic before her emotions could interfere. Flour in bulk would be cheaper through Restaurant Depot. Butter would still be a problem unless she opened a wholesale account. Packaging would need to be ordered by the case. She would need Nora again, maybe 2 more part-time helpers, and the commercial kitchen on East 14th charged $35 an hour after midnight, but $48 during the day. There would be insurance paperwork, deposits, delivery timing, labels, invoices. The practical details rose around her like scaffolding, and for the first time in months, they did not feel like threats. They felt like a building. Marjorie opened the folder just enough for Emily to see the printed proposal. "It is not final until procurement signs off Monday," she said, but Charles already approved the budget range. The first event would be 250 guests. Emily's fingers tightened around the folder when Marjorie passed it to her. 250 guests. Her largest order so far had been 84 cupcakes for a retirement party in Arlington, delivered in the back seat of Rachel's Subaru, because Emily's own car had chosen that morning to display a warning light with the confidence of a machine that knew it could ruin her day. She remembered driving across town with the boxes balanced between folded towels, whispering, "Please, please, please," every time the traffic light turned red. She remembered the woman at the party handing her a check and saying, "You should charge more." At the time, Emily had laughed politely, then gone home and cried over the sink because she was too tired to sit down first. Now, standing under chandeliers in a hotel where valet parking cost more than she used to spend on groceries in 2 days, she held a folder that could change the size of her life. Not make her rich, not fix everything. Real life was not that lazy, but it could pay for the mixer. It could cover 3 months of kitchen rental. It could let her buy ingredients before orders instead of praying customers paid deposits on time. It could turn Carter and Rose from a brave little experiment into a business with a pulse. Across the room, Daniel was still watching. Emily felt it before she saw him. He stood near the bar now, apart from Vanessa, his phone in one hand, his expression darker than confusion and quieter than anger. Once, his attention had made her nervous enough to rearrange herself. Tonight, it became part of the furniture. She turned her back slightly and opened the proposal. The first page smelled faintly of toner and expensive paper. Vendor partnership. Estimated quarterly volume. Payment terms. Preferred supplier status. Words that would have bored her in Daniel's world now looked almost wholly in hers. Marjorie touched her arm gently. You do not have to answer tonight. Emily looked down at the amount listed beside the first event, then at the gold Carter and Rose label on a nearby pastry box, then at the folded apron over her arm. She thought of her mother's notebook, of Rachel's stubborn faith, of Nora counting mousse cups in the service corridor, of the $17 she had once circled 3 times because it had been proof that she could still create something useful from her own 2 hands. I know, Emily said. Her voice was quiet, but there was no tremor in it. But I am interested. Marjorie smiled as if she had expected nothing less. Behind them, Daniel finally began walking toward her, but this time Emily did not wait for his arrival to decide who she was. Daniel reached Emily just as Marjorie slipped away to speak with Charles Harlan, leaving the cream folder in Emily's hands like a door someone had finally unlocked from the inside. For a moment, he said nothing. He looked at the folder, then at the gold Carter and Rose labels, then at Emily's face, as if rearranging facts into an order that hurt less. The ballroom continued around them with the bright indifference of expensive places. Silverware chimed. A photographer called for a group near the sponsor wall. Somewhere behind Daniel, Vanessa laughed too loudly at something that did not deserve it. Emily waited, not because she owed him patience, but because she had spent enough years reacting to his moods and no longer wished to donate her energy to that particular charity. Daniel cleared his throat. Preferred vendor, he said, glancing toward the folder. That is impressive. Emily held the folder against her side. It is an opportunity. A big one, he said. Bigger than you are used to. There it was. Not cruelty exactly. Something worse in its familiarity. The soft correction hidden inside concern. The careful little hook meant to pull her back into doubt. Emily almost smiled. Some people changed. Daniel, apparently, had chosen historical preservation. I am aware of the scale, she said. I have production notes, cost projections, and staffing options already drafted. His eyebrows lifted slightly, and the surprise in his face was so honest it nearly made her sad. He had expected cupcakes and courage, maybe a sentimental little hobby wrapped in gold stickers. He had not expected spreadsheets. He had not expected that the woman he once called impractical now knew the exact wholesale price of butter, the hourly rate of 3 commercial kitchens within 15 miles, the insurance requirement for corporate catering, and the difference between cash flow and profit, because poverty is a brutal but effective business school. Daniel lowered his voice. Emily, listen. I am not trying to undermine you. That was usually what he said immediately before undermining her. But contracts like this can get complicated. Late payments, fulfillment penalties, liability language. You should have someone look at it. Someone who understands business. Emily looked down at the folder. The old Emily would have heard only the warning. She would have felt small inside her own accomplishment, grateful that Daniel had noticed the danger before she embarrassed herself. The woman standing in the Grand Meridian ballroom heard something different. She heard fear wearing a helpful suit. I have an accountant, she said. And Rachel's cousin is a contract attorney. Daniel blinked. You hired an accountant? Not full-time. Quarterly. Still. He gave a short laugh, almost to himself. You really did plan this. Emily studied him under the chandelier light. For the first time, she understood that Daniel had not only underestimated her future. He had needed her to remain predictable so his past would make sense. If she succeeded, then leaving her with so little would not look like wisdom. It would look like arrogance. If she grew, then his version of her would shrink. No, she said quietly. I did not plan this exact moment. I planned not to fall apart. The sentence silenced him more thoroughly than anger could have. His eyes moved over her face, and something like regret passed through them. But Emily no longer trusted every softened expression as proof of a changed heart. Regret was easy in a ballroom after applause. It was harder at 2 a.m. when someone was alone with bills and a broken mixer. Daniel took a breath. I heard about the apartment, he said. The one near the highway. I did not know things got that tight. Emily felt the old humiliation rise and settle. Shame, she had learned, loses strength when spoken plainly. They did. You could have called me. The words came out gently, and that almost made them worse. Emily remembered unanswered emails about a delayed settlement transfer. She remembered his lawyers saying all communication should go through counsel. She remembered Daniel's new address appearing in a glossy magazine feature while she compared generic flour to name brand flour in aisle 7. No, she said. I could not. He looked away. This time, he did not argue. Near the stage, Charles Harlan raised a hand toward Emily, signaling that he wanted to introduce her to procurement before the night ended. Emily adjusted the folder under her arm and turned to leave. Daniel spoke once more, softer now. Emily. She paused. I really did think you would come back. The confession hung between them, small and embarrassing, like a receipt for something foolishly purchased. Emily looked at him, not with triumph, not with bitterness, but with the clean distance of a woman who had finally stopped standing in the doorway of a life that had closed behind her. I know, she said. That was your mistake. Then she walked toward the stage, toward the paperwork, toward the future arriving in practical shoes and black ink, while Daniel remained beside the dessert table with nothing to hold but the taste of what he had failed to recognize. Charles Harlan introduced Emily to the procurement director, a silver-haired woman named Denise Porter who wore reading glasses on a gold chain and had the calm, assessing eyes of someone who could spot a weak invoice from across a room. Denise did not gush, which Emily appreciated immediately. Gushing was for guests holding dessert forks. Business required cleaner weather. She asked about delivery radius, kitchen capacity, insurance coverage, ingredient sourcing, staffing, and whether Carter and Rose could provide itemized pricing by head count instead of by tray. Emily answered each question with the folder tucked against her ribs and her pulse moving faster than her voice. She explained the rented commercial kitchen on East 14th, the pending general liability policy increase, her current wholesale supplier, and the staffing model she planned to use for events over 100 guests. She did not pretend everything was already perfect. She had spent too much of her marriage decorating lives for Daniel to waste her second life doing the same. I would need 2 weeks before the first event to scale production properly, she said. For 250 guests, I would recommend 3 dessert options, 1 gluten-free option, and a 10% overage. I can send a formal quote by Monday morning. Denise studied her for a moment, then gave one approving nod. Monday by 10 o'clock would be ideal. Emily felt that nod like a contract even though nothing had been signed yet. It was not applause. It was better. It was trust with a deadline. Behind Denise, Daniel hovered at the edge of the conversation like a man trying to find a polite entrance into a house that was no longer his. Emily saw him, but she did not make room. That small refusal gave her more satisfaction than any dramatic confrontation could have. Humans waste a remarkable amount of energy trying to be seen by people who brought no glasses. Emily had finally stopped handing Daniel the lens. Denise excused herself to join Charles near the sponsor wall, promising to email the vendor packet before midnight. Emily slipped one of her business cards into the folder and pressed her palm briefly over the cover, grounding herself. The card was simple. Carter and Rose, small batch desserts and event catering, Emily Carter, founder. Founder. The word still looked slightly too large beside her name, like a coat she was growing into by wearing it daily. Daniel stepped closer once Denise was gone. You handled that well, he said. Emily turned just enough to acknowledge him. That was the goal. I mean it. You sounded prepared. Prepared. The word opened a door in her memory before she could stop it. The first month after the divorce, she had not felt prepared for anything. Not for rent due on the 1st. Not for the call from the insurance company explaining that her coverage had changed. Not for the awful silence of Sunday mornings without Daniel's coffee grinder roaring in the kitchen like a small domestic engine. She had been 34 years old and had still needed Rachel to sit beside her at the kitchen table while she made a budget. Rent, $1,400. Utilities, around $190. Car insurance, $132. Phone, $81. Groceries, whatever remained if she did not look too closely at fresh berries. There had been no category for pride, so pride had learned to live on leftovers. The first time she baked for money, she undercharged so badly that Rachel circled the numbers with a red pen and said, "Congratulations, You have invented unpaid labor with frosting. Emily had been offended for 6 minutes. Then she had recalculated. That was the beginning of preparation. Not confidence. Not inspiration. Math. Math had become the language Daniel never expected her to speak. It stripped fear down to columns and forced panic to show receipts. You know, Daniel said, lowering his voice. I still have contacts who could help you with suppliers. Better pricing. Bigger kitchens. Emily looked at him carefully. There was a time she would have heard generosity. Tonight, she heard the old instinct to attach himself to something once it became valuable. I appreciate the offer, she said, but I have it covered. His smile tightened. You do not have to do everything alone. I know, Emily said. That is why I chose people who respect me. The sentence was not loud. It did not need to be. Daniel absorbed it as if it had arrived stamped and notarized. For a moment, the ballroom noise softened around them. The music, the laughter, the clink of glasses, the soft machinery of money congratulating itself. Emily thought of her mother's notebook waiting at home on the small kitchen shelf, its pages stained and patient. She thought of the commercial mixer she would soon be able to buy, not as a fantasy saved in an online card, but as equipment. She thought of Monday morning at 10 o'clock, of line items, deposits, delivery fees, and the beautiful seriousness of being expected to deliver. Then Vanessa called Daniel's name from across the room, sharp with impatience. He turned, caught between the woman waiting for him and the woman who had stopped. Emily did not wait to see which way he moved. She walked back toward the service corridor, where Nora was stacking empty boxes, where work remained, where the future did not sparkle quite as much as the ballroom, but smelled warmly of sugar, lemon, and something rising. The service corridor had never looked more beautiful to Emily than it did when she stepped back through the swinging doors and heard them close behind her. The ballroom was all velvet noise and expensive light, but here the air was cooler, cleaner, less interested in pretending. Nora had already begun stacking the empty pastry boxes into neat columns beside the rolling cart, her cheeks pink from the rush of the evening and her dark ponytail slipping loose at the nape of her neck. Was that what I think it was? Nora asked, trying and failing to sound casual. Emily set the cream folder on a stainless steel prep table as if it were fragile enough to bruise. It might be, she said. Nora pressed both hands over her mouth, then remembered she was holding a roll of packing tape and nearly stuck it to her chin. Emily laughed, a small startled sound that felt younger than she had felt in years. The laugh loosened something in her chest. Not everything. Grief does not politely exit because one good thing happens, despite humanity's strange obsession with pretending healing follows a clean schedule. But something loosened. She touched the folder again, then reached for her phone. There were 3 unread messages from Rachel, each one more impatient than the last. Did they like the lemon bars? Did Daniel see you? Are you alive, or should I drive over there with emotional support coffee? Emily typed with one thumb, careful not to smudge the corner of the proposal. They announced Carter and rose from the stage. Possible preferred vendor contract. Daniel heard everything. For several seconds, the message showed as delivered. Then Rachel's reply appeared in all capital letters, which was her native language when miracles or parking tickets were involved. Emily did not read it aloud because Nora was already smiling hard enough to understand. Your friend? Nora asked. My first investor, Emily said. She invested groceries, sarcasm, and belief. Nora nodded solemnly, as if that were a standard funding category. Emily slipped the phone into her pocket and began helping with cleanup because no amount of public recognition changed the fact that mousse cups did not stack themselves and sugar tongs did not magically return to inventory. Work had a kindness to it when it was honest. Each empty tray meant people had eaten. Each used napkin meant the table had been visited. Each business card tucked into her folder meant tomorrow would require courage in a new size. As she packed the last row of unused labels, the service door opened behind her. She expected a hotel server, maybe Marjorie, maybe Denise with another form. Instead, Daniel stepped into the corridor, and for the first time all night, he looked out of place. In the ballroom, his suit had belonged to the architecture. Here, under fluorescent light beside a mop sink and stacked crates, he looked overdressed and strangely incomplete. Nora glanced between them, her expression sharpening. Emily gave her a slight nod. Could you check whether the loading dock elevator is ready? Nora hesitated. then left with the reluctance of someone abandoning a very interesting chapter. Daniel waited until she was gone. "I am sorry," he said. The words were so unexpected that Emily's hands stilled over the box of labels. She had imagined Daniel saying many things over the years. Explanations, excuses, carefully edited regrets, even compliments that arrived wearing the cheap cologne of self-interest. But sorry was different. Sorry was a small word with heavy furniture behind it. "For what?" Emily asked. Daniel looked at the floor, then at the boxes, then at the cream folder on the table. "For tonight. For what Vanessa said. For what I said." He swallowed. "For more than tonight." The corridor hummed around them. Pipes in the ceiling, wheels from a cart somewhere farther down, the distant muffled applause from another ballroom where some other human ceremony was congratulating itself. Emily leaned one hand against the table, not because she was weak, but because old injuries sometimes ache when weather changes, and Daniel's apology was weather. "You left me to explain your choices to everyone," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady, and almost kind, which made the truth sound even heavier. "You let people think I was careless. You let them think I was helpless. You knew I was scared, and you used that because it made the story easier for you." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "I know." "No," Emily said. "You know now? There is a difference." He opened his eyes, and there was no defense in them this time. That should have satisfied her more than it did. But Emily had learned something difficult on the road from humiliation to survival. An apology could acknowledge damage without repairing the years it occupied. "I do not need you to punish yourself," she said. "I am not carrying that too." Daniel looked at her as if he had expected anger and did not know what to do with mercy that refused reunion. "Then what do you need?" he asked. Emily looked at the boxes stamped with Carter and Rose, at the folded apron, at the proposal waiting under the fluorescent lights like proof that tomorrow had already begun. "Nothing from you," she said. And the astonishing thing was that she meant it. Daniel stood in the service corridor with his hands at his sides, looking at Emily as if he had expected her freedom to be dramatic, perhaps angry, perhaps tearful. Something he could understand because it still revolved around him. Instead, she was calm in the least convenient way possible. She had not forgiven him for his comfort. She had not condemned him for his guilt. She had simply stepped outside the reach of his importance. And for a man like Daniel Carter, that was a colder sentence than any accusation. Emily turned back to the prep table and began closing the last box of unused labels. The motion gave her hands something to do while the silence rearranged itself. "I should get back," Daniel said finally, though neither of them believed the ballroom was what had called him away. "Vanessa is waiting." Emily nodded. "Then you should not keep her." He flinched a little at the plainness of it. Once, that sentence might have carried bitterness. Tonight it carried nothing but fact. Daniel glanced toward the cream folder, then toward the folded apron, and for one strange second Emily saw him not as the villain of her life, but as a man standing in the consequences of a story he had written badly. That did not make the harm smaller. It only made him human, which was annoyingly inconvenient, as humanity so often insists on being. "Emily," he said, softer now, "I hope this works for you." She looked up. The old part of her, the part that still remembered loving him before love became a room with locked windows, recognized the effort in his voice. It was not enough, but it was something, and something did not have to become everything. "So do I," she said. Daniel waited, perhaps for more, perhaps for a bridge, perhaps for one of those generous emotional discounts women are trained to offer, so everyone can leave feeling tidy. Emily gave him none. After a moment, he nodded and walked back toward the ballroom. The swinging doors opened, spilling gold light and music into the corridor, then closed behind him with a soft sigh. Nora returned almost immediately, as if she had been guarding the loading dock with one ear pressed to destiny. "Everything okay?" she asked. Emily smiled faintly. "Everything is finished." Nora glanced at the doors. "That sounds different from okay." "It is." They loaded the remaining boxes onto the cart. Together, the hotel's freight elevator smelled faintly of cardboard, floor cleaner, and the tired end of a long event. Downstairs, the loading dock opened into the cold night air. It was nearly 11:30, and the city beyond the alley shimmered with wet pavement and taxi lights. Emily's old car waited near the curb, its back seat already lined with clean towels to keep the boxes from sliding. The warning light on the dashboard still glowed, because even on transformative evenings, machines continued being petty. Nora helped load the last cart, then hugged Emily quickly before catching her rideshare. "You were amazing tonight," she said. Emily wanted to deflect it, to make it smaller, to say she had simply done the work. Instead, she practiced receiving. "Thank you." When Nora left, Emily stood alone beside the car with the cream folder held against her chest. For the first time all evening, she let herself feel tired. Not defeated tired. Not divorce tired. Not the kind of tired that made a person question whether mourning was worth the trouble. This was honest tired, earned tired, the tired of a woman who had carried trays, answered questions, stood under lights, faced a ghost, and still had invoices to send before bed. Her phone buzzed again. Rachel had sent a picture of a glass of sparkling water raised in a toast, followed by a message. Rose would be insufferably proud. Emily read it twice. The cold air blurred slightly, and she blinked until the streetlights sharpened. Her mother's notebook was waiting at home, on the narrow shelf above the stove. Tomorrow, Emily would open it beside the procurement packet, one old paper history next to one new paper possibility. She would calculate butter by the pound, delivery by the mile, labor by the hour, and courage by whatever remained after fear had made its argument. She placed the folder carefully on the passenger seat, buckled it in without thinking, then laughed at herself in the dark. Maybe that was what a first business really was. Something fragile enough to protect, serious enough to plan, and personal enough to feel ridiculous when you loved it. Emily started the car. The engine coughed, considered betraying her, then decided to cooperate. She pulled away from the Grand Meridian, leaving the chandeliers, the applause, Daniel, and the woman she used to be behind her. Ahead, the road was slick, ordinary, and entirely hers. Emily did not drive straight home. She meant to, but halfway down Arlington Avenue, with the Grand Meridian disappearing behind her in the rearview mirror, she pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store where the fluorescent sign buzzed against the wet night like an exhausted insect. 9 months earlier, that same kind of light had made her feel exposed and ashamed while a cashier waited for a payment that would not go through. Tonight, she sat with both hands on the steering wheel, the cream folder buckled into the passenger seat, and watched ordinary people move through the automatic doors with carts and umbrellas and tired faces. A father carried a sleeping child against his shoulder. A woman in scrubs bought soup and oranges. A teenage employee pushed carts through puddles with the grave determination of someone underpaid by civilization itself. Life kept going in small, unglamorous units. Milk, gas, rent, flour, courage. Emily turned off the engine and laughed softly when the dashboard warning light vanished with it, as if even the car needed rest from its own complaining. She went inside, not because she needed anything, but because she wanted to walk through the aisle that had once humiliated her and leave on her own terms. The store smelled of floor wax, apples, coffee from the self-serve station, and the faint cardboard scent of stacked cereal boxes. She took a basket and moved slowly toward baking supplies. Flour was still $3.89 for the store brand. Butter had gone up again, because apparently even dairy products had ambitions. Eggs sat under a sign advertising a weekend special. Emily stood there, holding the basket against her hip, and remembered the woman she had been on that awful afternoon. Face hot, card declined, throat tight, pretending to search her purse for another payment while calculating how much dignity could be surrendered before anyone noticed. She had left. Without the butter that day. She had gone home and told Rachel she was fine. Rachel had shown up 30 minutes later with groceries, paper towels, and the expression of a woman ready to fight poverty with coupons and rage. Emily reached for 2 pounds of unsalted butter now, then a 5-pound bag of flour, not because she needed them for the event, but because buying them felt like reclaiming a language that once hurt to speak. At the checkout, the cashier scanned the items without drama. The total was $19.42. Emily inserted her card. Approved. Such a small word. Such an absurdly powerful little gatekeeper. She carried the bag back to the car and placed it on the floor behind the driver's seat, then drove home through quiet streets glazed with rain. Her apartment building looked exactly as it had that morning. Brick walls, narrow stairwell, one porch light flickering with theatrical dedication. Nothing outside had changed. That seemed right. The important revolutions rarely announced themselves to the neighbors. Inside, the apartment was dark except for the small stove light she always left on. Her kitchen was narrow, with laminate counters, a tiny round table, and shelves she had installed herself after watching a video twice and pretending she was not afraid of the drill. Rose's recipe notebook waited above the stove, its faded blue cover softened at the corners. Emily set the cream folder beside it. For a while, she simply looked at them together. One held the past in handwriting and stains. The other held the future in printed clauses and payment terms. Both required her hands. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it. She took off her flats, hung the black dress over a chair, washed the flour dust from her wrists, and made a cup of tea because victory, annoyingly, still required hydration. Then she opened the folder and read every page. Not as Daniel's ex-wife. Not as someone rescued. Not as a woman proving a point to a man who had already spent too much of her life as an unpaid audience member. She read as Emily Carter, founder of Carter and Rose, owner of a small business with one borrowed mixer, one loyal friend, one possible contract, and a future that would need invoices by Monday at 10 o'clock. Near midnight, she opened her mother's notebook to the lemon bar recipe and tucked Denise Porter's business card between the pages like a bookmark. The apartment was still small. The car still needed repair. The contract was not signed yet. There would be problems by morning because reality had poor manners and never waited outside until people were emotionally ready. But Emily no longer felt like a woman standing in the wreckage of what Daniel had taken. She felt like a woman standing at the first brick of something she had chosen. He had thought empty hands meant emptiness. He had been wrong. In empty hands, Emily had found room to build.